Um, you're some of the first people to see this work, and it's been long anticipated. It's a project that began during the pandemic, where I had a residency with the Science Gallery International and Science Gallery Venice, as part of the Earth, Water, Sky residency. So I was an artist who's working with the sky. And I often work with wind, as you know, because my work is the Library of the Winds, which was commissioned by WorkTank, is on view these days at Kadok. And also this work is mine as well, which is one of the gifts that WorkTank commissioned. It's the face of the wind as a turbulence pattern that was reproduced in a wind tunnel. Yeah, and so the project itself was funded by, I should say this, the foundation Didier Martin Primat, and essentially what it is following the Scirocco wind from Venice to its point of origin in the Egyptian Sahara. And so the overall film is about 45 minutes at the moment, and I've cut it in half as a selection. And I'm really curious to hear, as a kind of test audience, what your impressions are. Okay. So it has an abrupt ending because, well, as I mentioned, it's cutting a 40-minute movie into 20 minutes that is already very fresh. But yeah, for me, it's, I guess I'd like to open it up for questions. If there's any particular imagery or something that you're wondering about, I know it's a kind of like a impression. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what's happening with this sound at the moment is that it's created by musicians that I know from back home, where I come from, Toledo, Ohio. They're a group called Heavy Color, and they're creating a score for the film. At the moment, the sound which is there are the sketches which are developed for the film, but they're now going to work, now that they have the edit, they will then tune it to it so that it cuts with the images and so on. And some of these images some of the sequences I had to speed up, so that's why the sound might sound a little bit, to make the 20 minutes, let's say. But the concept was trying to create a spatialization and also working with woodwind instruments in particular. So there's a lot of different varieties of saxophone and clarinet which are at play and also being manipulated, because this is a sound created by wind as well. There's three, let's say. I think I became interested in wind. I mean, if I really psychoanalyze myself, let's say, it's because I grew up in an extremely windy place. It was the former Black Swamp in the northwest Ohio, where Lake Erie meets the land, and it was drained when it was settled. So it has the second largest irrigation system after the Netherlands there in the world, and it is, and that caused an extremely flat landscape where wind would really howl and the sky became really dominant, and there's a lot of tornadoes, and this is also where the Wright brothers are from originally as well. So there's flying, and hobbyist flight is also a part of this culture. And I think that for me, as I started working with wind, it also became an analog for artistic creation itself, where I feel as an artist I'm often trying to give form to those things which are present but don't really have a defined form yet. So it starts to, this attempt to grasp it, to give it a form, whether it's by visualizing it with smoke and lasers, or in this case, trying to show that this condition that we live in, which is, you know, all life as we know it exists within this very thin layer of air held to the surface of the earth by gravity, is something that conditions our physical existence, but also our cultural life as well. And that was part of the attempt here, was to show how between Italy and Egypt, this Scirocco wind has intertwined these two cultures over the course of centuries. And the second question, about the personas. Well, it's red and blue is important because these are, in meteorology, these are often the colors used to represent warm air and high pressure, and low pressure and cold air. And it's the relationship between the two that causes the movement of air, which becomes wind. So that was a kind of persona in a sense, and what they're doing is collecting the dust in Venice, which comes from Egypt, and then also releasing it. They're kind of animating, let's say, these places, because these sites where I was shooting were also like the pyramids of Giza, the Vatican, the botanical gardens of Padua, the oldest gardens in the world. So it was like, how do I restage these places and restage the wind, but also restage these histories as though they are the consequence of a wind, which was the attempt. And that's why I'm often walking backwards as well, because it's about finding it to its origin, but I think it was interesting because it resonates with your work, which I was hearing earlier today. You know, it's the question of authenticity, the origin, always wanting to go back to the origin. Where do things come from? And that was something on my mind here too. The present always seems like a cheap copy of the past somehow, and where things come from. And that's always been a historical question about wind, like for Aristotle onwards. It was always about like, well, where does this come from? And it was only until Robert Boyle's experiments with barometry that people realized that wind is part of a global phenomena, when he distributed these all over England, barometers to measure pressure, that it wasn't just a local phenomena, that it's a movement that happens over large distances and so on. Yes.
So for me, it stood out how in imagery, the invisible element of wind is captured through the movement of objects, like you have so how the invisible element of wind is captured visually through the movement of flags, of curtains, drapes, also drapes in the sculptures, and also the movement in sand, dust, also movement in plants. It made me think of this idea of being moved by an invisible force, and then kind of in juxtaposition to the imagery of these sacred spaces or tombs. It also made me think of this being moved by this invisible force as a kind of metaphor for life, but also the migration that is there, also with the plants, that there was the papyrus plant that occurs in the botanical garden, and also to change, and I was also noticing these like recurrent colors, but another element that is recurrent is the white lily. Do you want to comment on that, because that's a very typical element in Christian iconography?
Yeah.
For you?
I think it's. Originally, in many cultures, wind is all of existence is brought into being by the breath of God, which is the animus, which animates everything. In Greek, it's the pneuma or pneuma, which is the Holy Spirit. You know, the study of the Holy Spirit is still called pneumatology, or in Arabic, the word raha is for soul, raha is to breathe, but ruhu is soul. So there's this long connection between breath and as an animating feature, and breath as a primordial wind. And I think that, it's no coincidence that the Vatican, that St. Peter's Square is actually a windrose with an obelisk marked in the center. That this demonstrates that, God is on our side because the wind is on our side, and we are bringing the wind into our sacred spaces in this way, also animating the sculptures themselves. And I wanted to show, there are two kind of features which I hope will come out a little bit more, but the two elements, one is dust and the other is pollen. And dust is carried by wind over long distances, but it's often thought to be bringing ill health, or like this red dust that comes from the Sahara has often been thought of, like in Italy they call it blood rain, where the surface of cars become red, or the streets and so on, and that's often thought to bring illness. But pollen is also carried by wind, which is a vital principle. It's the way that plants reproduce. And the rector of the gardens of Padua was this person named Prospero Alpini, who is famous for having brought bananas and coffee, and also developed a theory of aerial reproduction of plants through the time that he spent while he was the doctor to the Venetian consulate in Egypt. So there's a connection between Egypt and Padua, and this idea of reproduction, of recirculation of life via the air and via wind. And so I was focusing on palm trees and papyrus. But the lily is also an important symbol for purity within Catholic iconography. And there is, for me, this was maybe a way of addressing this kind of, let's say, Italian plant, that features in Renaissance painting very often. And there's a kind of also genderization going on within the film, where the two women are in Italy and I'm in Egypt. And there's a sort of dynamic at play that I kind of wanted to touch on, but it's not yet fully resolved in a certain sense. But there's some paintings I also want to introduce later. I had to leave some of them out, but what you see in one part is the St. Mark's body, which was returned to Cairo. When there's a scene with the Kaaba, revolving around the Kaaba, then we're revolving around the reliquary of St. Mark's body in St. Mark's Basilica in Cairo, which was returned to Cairo or to Egypt after the Venetians stole it and took it to Venice to build St. Mark's Basilica. So for me, it was a kind of interesting story about, the wind took the body of St. Mark, and also God had interfered. The body, they wanted to burn it originally after he was martyred, but a storm was brought, and the lily is an important feature in these paintings that depict the storm from God that prevented the burning of the body of St. Mark, when then it was then taken to Venice and then returned back to Egypt in the 70s to the Coptic Church. So it was also a little bit about like what goes, but also what comes back, and trying to create a movement in that sense. So there are many narratives, but there will be like a kind of a voiceover, but I'm a little bit unsure how much to put it in. So that's why it's nice to show you without any voiceover. But the current idea is that the voiceover for the scenes in Italy will be in Arabic, and the ones that are in Egypt will be in Italian. So they're almost like explaining each other to one another somehow. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. I mean, I was kind of excited to incorporate the Library of the Winds piece into this because the piece has the name of 18 different winds around the outside, and it's playing back those 18 different winds. But of those winds, Scirocco is one of them. So this is almost like a focus on one of the 18 winds that are present in the installation, the Library of the Winds. And I think it's interesting that you could kind of get the sense that there could be like this huge narrative unfolding that would happen with any of the other 18 winds as well, possible. But for me, it was also creating a third space between Italy and Egypt, let's say, a kind of control space, which is sort of outside of time, as you're suggesting as well. Something which is always happening, always animating a movement in wind, that provides like a stable point, but that it itself is in motion, that it itself is revolving. And so this was, I feel like to create meaning, oftentimes you need 3 points, you need a kind of triangulation, and this was like the effort there. Even in the piece itself, one of the wind machines is standing outside of the carousel to register the movement that's happening within the rest as a point of reference. And yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.